Thanks, Donna. So, as for map brownies, basically, if you work with a bunch of mappers who decide you need to raise some funds for a statewide land cover data set, this is what came out of it. This is what I showed up with at my last mapping conference. I'm happy I didn't try bringing a pan of brownies over an international boundary, but that's not why I'm here today. Donna, thank you for that introduction. Everybody here, thanks for coming to NACIS and to this presentation. And hello to everybody out there on the live stream. Let's hear about Roman Catholic churches and mapping them. Basically, this is kind of a progress report of what I've been doing as a passion, as an interest, certainly beyond the 9-to-5 job for, I guess it's been about 5 years now. So let's cut right into it. So thinking of this from the mapping end of things, we all have this passion, this interest, the skill set to map or at least to appreciate maps. And that's something, along with what we do in our regular jobs, perhaps our freelance jobs, it's something we should do something with when we have the opportunity, a cause near and dear to our hearts, to go ahead and apply that to something that may not financially pay back, but something you can still contribute to. And really this church mapping thing for me has represented that opportunity, an opportunity to give a service most of the time. There have been a couple small freelancey pieces in here, but it is a lot more putting elbow grease into an effort more so than having a nice economic model that's helping me have side money. So I'm hoping to have this example here, certainly for me to build on and keep doing this kind of spirited mapping, if you will, and hopefully inspire you when that opportunity comes to go ahead and do some of that mapping out of love, out of interest, out of service to whoever it is that you are, passionate about or for. So to provide some context here, both my home state, Wisconsin, and our NACIS host city have what I call these really old, pretty strong in their own way, Catholic bones. Basically here in Quebec, Montreal specifically, there's this culture, this history of French missionaries who came basically right behind the voyageurs, the explorers who settled Quebec and eventually Wisconsin and built up this impressive church architecture along with all the other wonderful, building footprints here in the city. If you went out on the NACIS walk, I believe it went through what's called the Vieux Montreal or Old Montreal neighborhood yesterday. You probably got a chance to see Notre Dame, which is featured on the left in these photos. And there's plenty of other really cool church buildings in town if you're into that architectural piece. In Wisconsin, similarly, with a little bit of influence from similar French missionaries, but more so a really strong immigrant culture that came into Wisconsin, there is a wonderful footprint, a very diverse footprint architecturally speaking, of these churches in and around both the urban areas and the rural countryside in America's Dairyland. In my case, this is one of the chief draws for me to go ahead and start seeing what are all these magnificent buildings about. And you can certainly apply this to other faiths, get out of religion altogether, and there are things to appreciate as well. It just so happens, which I'll explain in a minute, that the Catholicism piece is pretty near and dear to my heart. All these churches here amount to quite a spread, focusing on Wisconsin now, where we have 5 dioceses or kind of administrative bodies that oversee what's going on in the Catholic faith in the state of Wisconsin, and there are 500 churches basically spread throughout the whole state. There's really not a church-free zone, if you will. There's certainly a concentration, like here in Montreal, on our urban areas, Milwaukee in the southeast corner of the state, Madison somewhat in the southwest part of the state, Green Bay, where the French explorers arrived first in Wisconsin, is also a kind of hub for Catholicism in the state of Wisconsin. All these buildings, these 500 plus, have an appeal certainly to the religious, but also to genealogists, architecture historians, tourists, basically. I feel like sometimes I split my time between being a religious pilgrim who's going here out of devotion, but also as a tourist who really likes looking at pretty things, which sometimes stained glass windows and Gothic arches counts among them. So to provide a little more context to myself, there are 3 core concepts, if you will, that really, I think, make this project kind of a charge for me. One, I'm what they call one of those cradle Catholics, somebody who was born into the faith. It's something that, and I think all people, both religiously and, in other personal aspects in life, we go through these ebbs and flows, and Catholicism has stuck with mine, and it's, for me, a pretty enriching thing to go through. Also, dating back nearly as far is my interest for mapping. I think this is a 6-year-old version of myself scribbling over a Wisconsin state highway map, which to this day is still my favorite piece of mapping work, just because it's always been there to spur my imagination. Intersect cradle Catholicism with maps, probably with that map in particular. I am simply a Wisconsin junkie, if you will. I've always been into the culture of our state, the history of our state, moving away shortly after college to the gateway city of St. Louis, another Catholic city, if you will. If anything, only enhanced my passion for my home state, because every other day I'm calling either a family member or somebody at home and figuring out what's going on back in the homeland, and at the same time exploring St. Louis, realizing that they recognize their Catholic architectural heritage more so, and thinking, there's some pretty churches in Wisconsin that I never got to explore. I want to go report on those and share what there is to share about that with folks. So after moving back to Wisconsin, wrong way, in 2013, I started a blog project, kind of punny if you're familiar with the whole official name of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. Basically, this is my little forum to go ahead and share images and stories of the places that I visited, not just in Wisconsin, but I have a real hankering for Chicago's Catholic churches. My dear friend Laura came up here with me for this trip as well, and I think in 4 days we have visited 4 or 5 churches, along with going to the conference. I expect some Montreal photos will make it to this space at some point. And this is kind of welled up into the genesis of a cartographic journey. So Donna mentioned I do some freelance and volunteer mapping. I had a project for what's called Doors Open Milwaukee, basically an architecture open house in Wisconsin's largest city, which has been fun and successful both for me as a mapper and for the event. It draws, I think, as many as 30 to 40,000 folks into downtown Milwaukee over a weekend in September every year. But the point of contact who ran that event changed jobs to, coincidentally enough, the Catholic Archdiocese of Milwaukee. On day 2 on the job, she said, "Hey, Colter, we really don't have a visual of our 200 plus churches in our diocese. Make me a map." All right, sure, why not? Here's a real opportunity to get a little bit religious punny again, evangelize or carto-evangelize a potential client. We planned on this being a volunteer project, but to basically get them hip to what you can really do with maps if you play your cards out right. But first, we need to go over more mundane aspects, like data. Here, I figured this would be a simple, just give me a list of your churches and your addresses. You do own all of these places, right, dear Archdiocese of Milwaukee? Well, the first address list they gave me, which is featured up on top, features a bunch of American post office box addresses, which can't be mapped anywhere. Go ahead, we'll go and communicate with them again. I need your physical addresses, dear Archdiocese. Second table on the slideshow, or on the slide here, features physical addresses, but the Catholic Church in the Milwaukee area went through this phenomena of clustering or merging parishes, basically because there aren't enough priests, there aren't enough pieces of other administrative infrastructure for each church to run its own parish. So the parish highlighted in red in both of these tables, Blessed Teresa of Calcutta out in the suburbs of Milwaukee, is actually a clustered church of, I believe it may actually only be 2 parishes or 2 churches, not 3 like the first spreadsheet indicates, but I only had 1 address in the physical address version of the data. So it ended up with me going to every parish website in the Archdiocese, close to 200 of them, and finding every individual church that happened to have a religious service or mass every weekend, which is pretty time-consuming. One of the lessons, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later, is just really that need to communicate what you need and how to really resolve these sorts of problems as they arise in a project just to try to make things run more efficiently. One of the more fun aspects was trying to come up with a design that really jived with what the Archdiocese is all about, graphically speaking. Wisconsin person as I am, I know there's a value to having pretty abstract road shields, but doggone it, I like what we have in Wisconsin in our road shield network, so exact road shields it is. If somebody came up to me and proposed using Kansas's sunflower road shield for their state highways, maybe I'd think twice, but Wisconsin's is simple enough. Going down all the way to the church point of interest label, another funky little cartographic opportunity. No, I don't make points of interest the size of, a person's head on my map, but I was able to go ahead and use one of my favorite churches in downtown Milwaukee as my icon for all these churches in the diocese and still provide that kind of iconic point of view. And ultimately, looking at that graphic brand that the Archdiocese presented to me, I was able to come up with a map design scheme that really jived with what they had to offer. They like their Trajan font, so I used that where I could in my points of interest, and just used a couple complementary sans serif fonts to really make everything else flow together. And it's really kind of your simple, straightforward base map product. So finally, after lots of proofreading, 7 months of collecting data, checking data, making a map, proofreading it between me and Madison and the archdiocesan folks in Milwaukee, we got these large printouts made. I want to say that these maps were done in a pair, one for Milwaukee County, the urban area of the Archdiocese, and the more rural part. I want to say the print-offs themselves were each well over $100 a piece, but this is the foam core traditional cartographic product that the Archdiocese wanted. So if that's what's going to make them happy for now, fantastic. And from what I heard, actually last month, they just went through their second printing of these maps because some of the schools, the parishes, and folks want to see this get used more, which I'm fine with. This has also been an opportunity really to spread the word or, spread the uses of maps for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. In the time since then, they've used other maps or maps inspired off that first one to, in the case of the map on the left, feature urban parishes that could use some positive attention because there's not a ton of money flowing through inner city parishes. This map on the right gave a chance for folks to go ahead and visit a few of them in an event last fall. Later this month, the Archdiocesan newspaper is going to feature a modified transit map to help highlight the high schools that are in the Archdiocese to basically promote the cause that those schools are putting forward with high school age students in the Milwaukee area. Other feedback, I did take this to a mapping contest and it was successful in the, I think, base map category, so that was cool to see. Maybe a little more humbling or humorous depending on your tastes. The first time I went to the Archdiocesan offices after the project was over, you walk in the accessible to the public front doors and you see both of the maps right next to a photo of the Holy Father, Pope Francis himself. It's hard enough to get your photo with the Pope. It's probably even harder to get your map or any of your work smack dab with the Pope himself, the successor of St. Peter, after all. So this was pretty cool and maybe a little weird at first, but I'm pretty thrilled that that happened. So a couple of things that, I'm still absorbing as a take-home, if you will, from this will be, or certainly are, like I said, be prepared to, evangelize. Tell these clients what you can do with maps. Certainly be honest about it. Don't oversell it. But, try to open their eyes up to help spur, not just, foster your own ideas of what a good map can look like for a client or, volunteer community, but help them open their eyes so that they can kick up ideas as well. The subway map was not my idea at all. That came from the Archdiocese, and they said, hey, Colter, do you think you can do this? I did a little bit of it, but mostly their talented graphic artists took care of the rest, which was really cool to see them, get on their feet and do that as well. Problem solving, like I mentioned with the address issues, you've got to focus on, communicating those more difficult situations, even if, your customer, client base, volunteer base isn't all that hip to cartographic problems, so that you can work through things more quickly. Or if it does take longer, like it did in our address case, be prepared to make that an educational situation, at least for yourself, to do it better next time when you're working with somebody else. And one thing that I'm certainly still realizing, considering that I'm doing this on top of my regular 40 hours a week mapping job, make sure you're taking care of yourself and not running yourself into the ground on these projects too. I've gotten dangerously close to doing that multiple times, and a break from fun projects sometimes is necessary. I anticipate I'm going to have one very soon, actually. So, things to think about if you're doing the volunteer mapping thing. So now, what's next? My original goal when this started at one point with that church blog that I mentioned in mind was to map all the churches in Wisconsin, which that screenshot from before, the black map with 500 dots on it, is basically a prototype, but it's not publicly usable yet. It'd be nice to see that happen. What for? It could be a number of things. It could be reference maps like what we have with Milwaukee already. It could be an architecture inventory. It's a conversation I've had with our State Historic Society in the past. Or we do have this Fish Fry Friday culture in Wisconsin where traditionally you don't have red meat during the Lenten season, but in Wisconsin, people go to fish fries all 52 Fridays of the year, both in the bars and in the churches, ironically enough. Personally, I prefer most of the bar fish fries over the church ones, but there's good church ones too. What's wrong with the idea of a fish fry finder app? Who knows? There's a number of ideas that could come from that. Right now, trying to listen to people who already have ideas, it's on to other mapping projects. A while back, while going out and exploring churches, Laura suggested that I make her a map of the Diocese of Madison, which is where we both live, and it's a more rural part of the state, but certainly has its own church infrastructure. I chose to ignore for 6 months because I was swamped and needed to build up a stakeholder pool for this map, which still hasn't worked out. But eventually I caved and started making a map. She said something about making it blue, which I also didn't understand, so I turned it into a blueprint. And you can actually see the 95% done version of this map down in the map gallery. And right now, combine some of those blueprinty elements with we're in Frank Lloyd Wright country down in the Madison area, so I chose a few arts and crafts style fonts to try to get that feel in there, which a little bit to my surprise, I'm kind of liking what this looks like so far, but I need to finish the job. Other funny artsy maps that are, kind of on the docket. I have this weird fascination with the Art Nouveau style, and I see very, very few maps that ever attempt to capture it. So this was a really quick prototype that I slapped together last week that might give me a chance to kind of springboard and come up with something a little more glamorous down the road. And who knows what other ideas might come from this. So just a couple of thoughts. Don't be afraid to, like I said at the beginning, take those skills that you have and share those, even with, kind of unsuspecting folks that maybe won't instinctively recognize what your mapping skills can offer. Get that word out there so that, people's ideas can start to emerge, and be open to hearing things that you wouldn't be prepared or wouldn't have expected to hear, and go ahead and make some product out of it. And really, that wraps up much of what I have. I don't know if anybody has questions. I will totally take suggestions on Art Nouveau map ideas or any other component of this process. Otherwise, I certainly can answer things too. Thank you all very much again today.